Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Peace be unto you, brothers and sisters, friends of Salam Media, the Afia Foundation. We want to welcome you to all of our friends and guests in South Africa, the United States, and around the world to this week's edition of A Conversation with El-Hajj Mauri Saalakhan. I am pleased to be your host, coming to you once again through the Salam Media platform out of Johannesburg, South Africa. Salam Media is an online portal for humanitarian journalism. We don't just report the news, we advise you on what you can do about it. Today we have a very special program. Once again, this one is probably a notch above the others in terms of importance. 2 days ago, the United States of America and much of the world that has been locked into this ongoing and very unfortunate drama observed the 19th anniversary of the tragedy of September 11th. Today's program is titled Remembering 9/11, Remembering September 11th Before and After. We have two very special guests for today's program, but before we introduce them, I want to say something about today's program as a to lay the foundation for the conversation that's going to follow, inshallah. There are several things about the 9/11 attacks and its aftermath that were immediately glaring and remain so to this very day, 19 years later. Number one, the speed at which suspects in the conspiracy were identified and targeted. Secondly, the refusal on the part of U.S. authorities to even consider others might be involved. Thirdly, the stern intel report that was dated September 18th, 2001, that quoted an unnamed U.S. military intelligence source who referenced an intelligence memo that identified the Israeli Mossad intelligence service as having links to the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. Fourth, the Haaretz report out of Israel, dated September 17th, 2001, that was titled 5 Israelis Detained for Puzzling Behavior After the World Trade Center Tragedy. And this report was about the 5 Israelis with dual European citizenship who were arrested within hours of the attack while filming the smoking skyline from the rooftop of their company building. If I remember correctly, that building was located in New Jersey, right outside the New York-New Jersey line. And they were filming the smoking skyline and behaving in a celebratory manner. This is the reason why some of the neighbors in the area who noticed them on top of the roof filming and high-fiving each other and celebrating called the authorities. They were taken into custody. They were held for a while, and then they were quietly, from what I understand, allowed to leave the United States. Then next we have the Yadriat Aeronaut report. Both of these, the Haaretz and the Yadriat Aeronaut reports, are both out of Israel. This report is dated September 19th, 2001. Um, and it was titled 4,000 Israeli Employees in World Trade Center absent the day of the attack. The title speaks for itself. At minimum, it speaks to the fact that there was advanced knowledge of a pending attack on the World Trade Center. The report also notes that the Shabak, Israel's general security apparatus, prevented then Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon from traveling to New York City for a scheduled Zionist organization festival in support of Israel. Next, we have a report dated September 27th, 2001. All of these were within days in the same month of the attack. This report is attributed to Brian McWilliams of newsbites.com, which read, quote, officials at instant messaging firm Odigo confirmed today that 2 employees received text messages warning of an attack on the World Trade Center 2 hours before terrorists crashed planes into the New York landmarks. And then there is the ACN report of October 12th, 2001, about the 2 Israelis that were arrested inside the Mexican Congress in Mexico City. Both were armed with 9mm automatics, and one was carrying a military hand grenade, electrical wiring, and other bomb-related materials. Ernesto Cienfuegos, who wrote this story, said the following in his report. Many have questioned, this is a quote, many have questioned who may really be behind many of the recent terrorist attacks around the world, including the ones against the WTC, the World Trade Center, and the Pentagon. The Mexican public and Congress have been reticent about declaring war against Islam along with the US. It is possible that an act of terrorism against the Mexican Congress was planned in order to terrorize Mexico into towing the line against Islam. And then last, but certainly not least, we have what appears to be a well-documented report released on November 20th by Dick Eastman that was titled, quote, World Trade Center Attack, WTC Attack Destroyed Criminal Evidence. The report read in part, quote, here is evidence supplied by the head of security of the WTC, the World Trade Center, on network television, indicating that the floors used by the FBI, the 22nd, 23rd, and 24th floors of the North Tower, 70 floors below the crash bombing impact site, had been devastated by debris. The same head of security himself dug through the debris to save persons who were trapped there. Now, what is the significance of this? Aside from the fact that evidence for a number of very important criminal cases was destroyed. Again, this was 70 floors below the crash site. And subhanAllah, there is a movement called Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Now, these are sober-minded engineers and architects who have come together, formed an alliance, a truth-telling alliance, to contend against the official story, the official narrative on 9/11, which to them just doesn't make sense. It defies the science, they say. And their argument has been that those buildings came down, the 2 that were hit by planes, as well as the 3rd building that wasn't hit by a plane. That these 3 buildings came down as a result of controlled demolitions. Now, with that said, I want to introduce our guests for this afternoon's, for South Africa, this evening's conversation. Amir Malik Ali, and attorney Muhammad Bashir. They both joined us in prior conversations, and we invited them back to have some very important discourse around this extremely important topic. So I want to welcome the brothers with a hearty assalamu alaikum, and good to see you again.
Wa alaikum salam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you too, brother.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, we're going to start in alphabetical order. Amir Abdel Malik Ali, we're gonna start out with you, brother. Your opening thoughts on this 19th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Center, on the Pentagon, and of course we cannot forget the flight that went down in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts, your opening thoughts on where we are 19 years later.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. You know, it's good to honor to be with the brothers here, and back on Salam with the brothers there. Malcolm said a while back that whenever the government moves on you, they will first present you in a certain way, using the media to present you in a certain way, a negative way. He was talking specifically about the Black community. He said, first, the Black community is presented in the media as a community of criminals. Then once the people accept that narrative, then the police can come in and set up a police state. Now, using that analysis, I would like to just in recent history, just take about 2 minutes of recent history. 1979, the Islamic Revolution in Iran. And they were successful, alhamdulillah. 1982, the Islamic resistance rises up in Lebanon against the Israelis. 1984, the Islamic resistance in Afghanistan against the Soviet Union. 1987, the Islamic resistance in Palestine against the Israelis. So what was seen here was that Islam was making a move, if you will. One can even trace back the current Islamic revival back to 1979. So the Western governments, particularly the United States, had to get more military equipment to that part of the world, right? And so enter April Gillespie, the ambassador to Iraq, who tells Saddam Hussein that the United States would not have a problem if he went into Kuwait. Saddam Hussein goes into Kuwait, and now we have the Gulf War, and now we have an excuse to get as much military equipment to that part of the world as the United States possibly can. Now, very quickly, 1991, the Gulf War. 1991, Iran report dealing with the rise of Islamic fundamentalism. 1992, another government report, Iran's European springboard. 1992, the Islamic invasion. That's a documentary. 1993, the New Islamist International government report. 1993, World Trade Center bombing #1, which was a frame-up. If you remember real quick, in the O.J. Simpson trial, Dr. Frederick Whitehurst, who's in charge of the explosives division of the FBI, said that pressure was put on him and his office to make sure that those who were arrested in the World Trade Center bombing were actually guilty, to make it appear they were actually guilty. He was fired for that. And he sued the FBI for wrongful termination, and he got $1.1 million. That took place on the trial. He mentioned this at the trial of O.J. Simpson. 1993, Target America, a book. 1994, Jihad in America, a book and a documentary. 1995, Oklahoma bombing, first blamed Muslims were first blamed for it. 1995, every House member of Congress receives a copy of the documentary Jihad in America. 1996, TWA Flight 800, blamed on Muslims. 1996, Summer Olympics explosion, blamed on Muslims. 1996, the anti-terrorism bill by the government. You can go into a mosque and hear somebody giving a talk, and if you felt that they were a threat, you could detain them indefinitely. 1997, alleged plot to bomb the New York subways, frame up of Muslims. 1998, Hollywood gets back in the mix. Siege, movie with Denzel Washington, because nobody can kill a Muslim terrorist as cool as Denzel Washington can, right? So in the movie Siege, the Muslims take a means of transportation, in this case a van, laden with explosives, and drives it into a building, right? And also in the movie, it is talked about that MSAs, Muslim associations, should be infiltrated. Da, 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 da. I mean, it was a classic example of life imitating art, because that's exactly what happened, exactly what that movie said. MSAs were infiltrated and so on and so forth. 1999, a plot of Muslims trying to blow up the Space Needle in Seattle, Washington. Frame up. 2000, the Intifada at the El-Aqsa Masjid, and that was rooted in Islam. And lastly, 2001, Project of a New American Century, government report that said basically that the United States needs to upgrade its military capabilities, and that can't happen unless there is some type of cataclysmic event. A new Pearl Harbor, the report said. And coincidentally, there we were on September 11th, on 2001. Okay, I'm even told that when HBO did a movie on the first World Trade Center bombing, at the end of the movie, the terrorist who's in the helicopter and he's chained up looks out the window and sees the towers and says, "Next time we will take them both down." SubhanAllah, right? And so when you look at all of this and you look at what Malcolm said, this is why we were telling many of our immigrant brothers and sisters in the 1990s, something serious is coming. Something serious is coming for the Muslims, right? Why? Because they were setting us up. They were presenting us in the media as a people who deserves to be, who deserves to be persecuted, right? And we knew something was coming. We told them the United States is not just angry at the Shia. When the revolution happened in Iran, it was supposed to be just a Shia phenomena, and the Sunnis, we were good guys. But then with Afghanistan and Palestine, they couldn't play that game anymore. So it was clear that something was coming for us, because they were building this thing up to justify what they were getting ready to do to us. And then after 9/11, 9/11 becomes a justification to go into the current countries that they are in right now. And I want to say in closing that all of this is a reaction to something, brothers and sisters. All of this, what's going on, it's a reaction. What is it reacting to? It's reacting to an Islamic revival. We are in the midst of an Islamic revival, right? Even after 9/11, more and more people came to Islam. Islam is the fastest growing, quote unquote, religion everywhere in the world. All right. So they were responding to the Islamic revival and using these fake Muslim organizations, Al-Qaeda, fake, ISIS, fake, right? Using these fake Muslim organizations to use them as a justification to come into our countries. Okay. So this is what 9/11 represented. But you can tell Allah is in charge and in control. And it is Allah's will that this Islamic revival that is taking place, it will prevail, no matter what they try to do. So I'll stop there, inshallah. But I wanted to add a little bit historical context to it.
Brother Muhammad Bashir, you weigh in, my brother.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I couch all these comments. I pray that Allah guides my tongue the way He guides my heart, and that you asked me here to be me. So again, I tell people all the time, if you wanted Reverend Sharpton or if you wanted Michael Eric Dyson, you should invite them. But you invited me, and you know that my moniker is Raw Law. I was on the World Trade Center bombing, Chef. That first trial, 1993. It was a fake. The gentleman you cited from the O.J. Simpson case, in fact, testified at that particular trial.
Mm.
What people forget is that the FBI hired the person who actually created the bomb. They hired the person who actually drove the van so that the bomb could be planted. He was the one who masterminded. He was working both for Egyptian intelligence as well as United States intelligence as a way of orchestrating this particular event. He was never charged. He made his millions. He bounced. He went wherever he had to go. But he was the one who created that scenario. My deepest condolences to all the innocent. May Allah bless the innocent.
I mean,
In all affairs. And I think we need to come to an understanding of something. And brother, since you were kind enough to cite Malcolm, I'm going to take Malcolm a different on a different take. And
sure.
Malcolm once said that if you're black and you're not thinking black at this late date, well, I feel sorry for you.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go there. That particular quote is because we're a community here that has 400 years of dealing with this deception of the government. And brother just gave you a whole related history of the falsities that have been used to incriminate the Muslim community, to make the Muslim community look like the bad guy, after citing, and Malcolm was talking to the black community as to how they make the black community look criminal. The same strategy is being used and has been used. The tricky part about that is that we, as I told you once before on the show, Hajj Saalakhan, is that we have a tendency to look at isolated incidents. The World Trade Center bombing, isolated incident. The first World Trade Center case, isolated incident.
Mm-hmm.
We don't see the continuum of the process of criminalizing and expansion and destruction that the government is on. So allow me just to take a half a second to try to connect some local dots on that.
Mm-hmm.
They come with the law. In 1968, the ballot of the bullet was resonating, even though Malcolm was not on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
In 1964, the ballot of the bullet was resonating in the black community.
Mm-hmm.
Islam was beginning to resonate in the black community. Malcolm had moved toward what is commonly referred to as Sunni Islam, and the community was growing. I was part of that community. I didn't follow Malcolm. My people were Sunni Muslims before Malcolm, but were the ones who were encouraging Malcolm. In fact, my uncle Haji Sham Jabba was one of the people who was the actual person who formed Malcolm's Janazah. So the Islam was here. The Islam was beginning to thrive because now you had a potential voice of Islam that was a powerful voice speaking internationally on racism, white supremacy, and Islam, the powerful confluence of that combination. Ballot of the Bullet says freedom for everyone or freedom for no one. And the community began, there's parts of the community began to take that seriously, that we're going to fight for this right to be respected as human beings. So you have your rebellions in 64 when young black kids are set upon. You have your rebellions in 65 when young black kids are set upon in Harlem and in Rochester and in Newark and in Detroit, etc. And you see a continuation of these rebellions in various communities when there is police brutality. Let's jettison now to 68, well, 65, because that's where your Immigration Act, by virtue of the struggle that's being waged on the street, opens the door. Listen to me closely. Opens the door to Middle Eastern educated Islam touting Muslims. I debated some guy about this once before who didn't want, back in 63, the ones who were here at the Rat-a-tat, etc., didn't want any part of Malcolm or his discussion because he was too much fire, and they saw Malcolm as the American nightmare. But their ability to assimilate comes in 65 when they began to move in here in earnest into the United States. What they didn't do, Sheikh, as you indicated, when you were trying to warn the immigrant community as to what was coming, they didn't take the lessons of the generations of Muslims who had an understanding of what was coming.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like they could somehow offer an Islam that was more appeasing to America, as opposed to an Islam that was designed to help America see its own faults and change itself. As Malcolm once said, if America were to embrace Islam, than they could get from out of the evil that they were in.
Mhm.
So they didn't accept that from the community that I was coming from. And so therefore, when the history you begin to outline begins to unfold in front of them, they are still running for the hills, trying to find ways to be appeasement oriented
Right.
to the American culture. And in
Right.
fact, truth be told, the American culture began to embrace it as they began to wage an onslaught on their various countries. So George Herbert Walker Bush goes to the masjid and says, this is not a war on Islam when he declares war on terror.
Mhm.
All right. And 60% of Muslims, that is immigrant Muslims, who are maybe a first and second generation, vote for him. This guy who waged this war. His father waged the war that you talked about against Iraq, opening up Iraq to international arms dealing. Because remember, they financed Iraq against Iran. And
That's right. That's right. That's
And
right.
they tried to sell weapons to both sides.
That's right.
But they let Iraq into Kuwait. And then what did they do? They decided that they were going to invade Iraq based on a pretense. They had this young Kuwaiti girl who they tried to pawn off as a nurse talk about the incubators. Remember that story?
That's right.
And how the Iraqi soldiers were killing babies in these incubators, and she cried and the tears were flowing. And George Bush got on the thing and he said, we have to stop this kind of savagery. We have to shut down Saddam. It was really a pretext to get into the area. It was simply a pretext. And they used it and they were able to invade Iraq. Then they moved on and have been consistently moving on. But they've been consistently using the same philosophy that we are now talking about as it relates to 9/11. See, when you start talking about 9/11 and you begin to say maybe it was a false flag, maybe the history that you gave, Hajj Saalakhan, of the various stories that said that it could not have been done the way it's been reported as being done. When you look at that history, the only conclusion you can come to, at least on my end, is that there's a part that was designed locally. See, in 1993, after all the history you gave us, yet, Imam Jamil al-Amin had written his book, Revolution by the Book. So
Yes.
now throw him in with all that history of Islamic revolution.
Exactly.
And then add it here. And what comes out of Saudi Arabia but the Salafiyah movement?
Exactly.
And so you had the competing dialogue between the people who were saying revolution by the book and the people who were saying Saudi Arabian style black Islam.
Right.
And then you have the immigrant community who will not accept that America is not the land of the free, the home of the brave, that they were taught it was here when they came over here for economic benefit. So there's where we are. That's what leads us to 9/11. So as much as I abhorred 9/11, I still remember where I was in 9/11. I can still see this. I still remember the suit I had on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
That's how intense it was to watch it go down. Because I was in the earth. And by the way, that report you talked about was with the 5 Israelis. That's what Donald Trump was talking about when he was saying that the Arabs or the Muslims were cheering. It was those 5 Israelis that were captured who were cheering.
Exactly.
All right. And they were in Weehawken. And Weehawken, you can look from Weehawken and literally see downtown Manhattan. So if we just consistently stop looking at things as an isolated incident and begin to connect the dots as to what it is, then we can see that the onslaught on Islam has also been that there has been an acceptance of Middle Eastern Islam, immigrant Islam, to the exclusion of Islam as it was birthed here and as it had grown here in America. And it's done by design. The only people who don't seem to see it are those people who feel like they can benefit from the American dream. And unfortunately, that's your Dearborn, Michigan, your Fairfax, Virginia's, and that's not to disparage anybody's Islam. That's to say that you don't really understand the politics of America because you refuse to sit down with the people who have lived it and breathed it for 400 years.
Okay, my brother, you mentioned, Brother Muhammad, you mentioned the 1993 case and the agent provocateur that was being paid by the FBI to do what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to basically manufacture a conspiracy. This is what he was being paid to do. His name was Imad Salem, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's correct.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Imad Salem. You reminded me when you were giving sharing that narrative, Brother Muhammad, of what Bill Kunstler said in his book, My Life as a Radical Lawyer. I don't know if either one of you have read that book, but if you haven't, you should. I mean, it's tremendous history of his own experiences, insights, and the broader history of struggle involving the African American community and other communities, including the Muslim community. In chapter 16, the despised Muslim, he opens that chapter with a very telling quote, which connects to what both of you shared in terms of the pre 9/11 narratives. He said, quote, and keep in mind, this book was written and published in the mid 90s, before 9/11, years before 9/11. In chapter 16, The Despised Muslim, he says, today Muslims are the most hated group in the country. The moment a Muslim is accused of a crime, the specter of terrorism is raised and everyone panics. This is what he said. And then he went on to describe the different cases of Muslims that he, involving Muslims that he had been involved in. As you noted, Brother Muhammad, you were involved in the 1993 case. Both of you gave chronologies of key events that took place leading up to 9/11, with 9/11 being the creme de la creme of what many would objectively view as a conspiracy against Islam and Muslims. How do you, as I believe you're a retired attorney now, but once an attorney, always an attorney, using your legal mind,
Uh-huh.
using your legal mind, your legal insights.
Mhm.
How would you further connect beyond what you've already noted, what was happening pre 9/11 to what has been happening in America and abroad ever since, especially on the legal front, with the many cases of Muslims, the vast majority of them being young males, on occasion older males, and a few females here and there. What has been happening to them post 9/11? How do you connect those dots?
Interesting. Okay, let's use the law. Let's use the history. In '68, King is assassinated. In '68, Johnson, who everybody thinks is a civil rights icon, when really he opposed civil rights back when Eisenhower and Adam Clayton Powell united, the Democrat and Republican, to get a Civil Rights Act passed. Johnson, Eastland, Russell, Malcolm's three favorite friends. How can he be your friend and be his friend as well? These guys are the ones who are in opposition of civil rights. In '68, Johnson, after the so-called riots and after the Moynihan report, says that there's two Americas, one black, one white, separate but unequal, and gave solutions on how you solve it by a so-called Great Society, the ability to put economic growth and everything back into the black community or into the black community so that it could grow on par with the white community, passes the Safe Streets legislation. In that particular legislation, he opens up the door to your SWAT teams and your locals to get federal funds to fight crime in the urban area. Now, if you take that and you look from that law on, with every president has added something in the law directly to that and has used the same kind of war on terror psychology on the community in order to get that law passed. All they're doing is just adding law after law after law that adds a different element to it. So, for example, you get your Richard Nixon. He declares war on drugs, right? But Richard Nixon is the one who opens up internationally with China. So now while he's declaring war on drugs, he's using the moniker of war on drugs because he's a law and order president. And that war on drugs, you now know, based on Ehrlichman, was a lie. That there was no drug problem in America on the mass that he was claiming, and they used heroin to criminalize blacks and marijuana to criminalize whites. The same strategy, all right? The only people who are not catching it is us. Go ahead from there. And again, he's giving more money to the states. Go up there to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan and George Herbert Walker Bush. They use the same thing, but they use it internationally as well, because Richard Nixon used heroin from Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Ronald Reagan used cocaine from Central America. Criminalized the black community. Why? Why the black community? On the heels of the Black Panther Party. Why the heel of the unification of black consciousness? Because within that black conscious movement is the Muslim. The only force that has been out there that has ever talked about unifying is the Muslim. I am not from the War Deen Muhammad community, but his community begins to rise right at about that same time. So if you ever, again, I say, like Malcolm said, if you're black and you're not thinking black at this late date, I feel sorry for you. If you're Muslim, then you need to look at the history of the Muslims and see how the government moves there. So he goes with, Reagan goes with the same thing that Nixon goes with, the same thing that Johnson went with. And you go on and on and on till Bill Clinton, to George Herbert Walker Bush, all false flag, all false dynamics in the law that eventually lead to the USA Patriot Act, making the things that basically would have been civil rights actions like Martin Luther King sit-in potentially terrorist acts. But they all follow on the heels of the Church Commission, finding that the government had been spying on people, had been surveilling people illegally, and they wiped it all out. The Patriot Act comes along and combines all the domestic laws that they had, that Reagan put together, that Johnson put together, and turns it all upside on their head. Now, surveillance, legal. Tapping your phone, legal. The FISA courts under Jimmy Carter becomes secret evidence, legal. All of them. If you put them all together and you see it, the full picture, not just it was President Johnson, it was President Reagan. If you put them all together, then you see that it is one big continuation of the same or similar policy using the same or similar strategies of putting out the lie, criminalizing the community, and then saying we're going to declare war on something that we created. This is exactly what they do with Osama bin Laden. They call something Al-Qaeda, something that they created to fight Afghanistan. Then they flip it and they turn it, and now he's public enemy number one, and something called Al-Qaeda is called public enemy number one. It's not a fabrication. It is an asset created by the CIA, etc. And the only people who don't get it are us, because again, we are fighting like hell to be American acceptable as opposed to being American world savers, American change, the change that America needs that will help America move forward. So the connections are always there. If you look at the law and just follow it, the law precedes the history, and bow, it'll slap you right in your face that here you are in 2020, and your narrative. I heard a CARE announcement the other day. CARE, Council on Arab and Islamic Relations, say
Council on American Islamic Relations.
Islamic Relations say that the 9/11 attacks were carried out by Al-Qaeda. And I said, now the argument was we got to make sure that our kids don't get false stories about Islam and about 9/11 in their schools. And the first thing out of their mouth was, we have to make sure that they understand that it was carried out by Al-Qaeda, and that's not a reflection on Muslims. I mean, really? I mean, come on. Either tell the story, learn the story before you start talking about the story, or you won't. And here we are, 2020, basically reliving the same kind of discussion that we should have had, should have been listened to when Malcolm called out immigrants, when H. Rap Brown, then Stokely called out the immigrant community, when Muslims from around the country have been saying to the immigrant, let's come together on this Islam because you don't understand America the way we do. We can educate you on America in a way that we all can move forward. And it's been rejected. So again, the connections are there. The connections are there in the law. The connections are there in the history. We just have to wake up and smell the coffee.
Brother Abdel Malik,
Mm.
the war on terrorism produced a divide and conquer. In fact, it was just alluded to by our brother in what in what he just shared, and
Yeah.
especially as it pertains to the unfortunate release that he said came from CARE. Aki, was this from CARE National or was it from one of the local CARE organizations? Do you remember?
Right. I fortunately or unfortunately, when I hear stuff like that, just in case I want to reach out to somebody, I just download it. And so give me a second and let's look on my phone, and I'll be able to tell you exactly where it came from.
Okay. But Abdel Malik, the war on terrorism produced a divide and conquer paradigm within the Muslim community in America and abroad.
Mm-hmm.
How has that, and you've been, you've had a bird's eye view from the West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
especially given the kind of work and the associations that you have had into this divide and conquer paradigm. You know, why don't you expound on that a bit?
Well, you know, brother, what the brother's saying is so on point. And when CARE makes a statement like that, they don't realize that they become accomplices to pushing false narratives. And it is their fear or their unwillingness to, as brother said, sit down with us to understand how this system works. They become accomplices. This is why I think the hope is in their children. The hope is in their youth. You know what I'm saying? Because the parents feel like guests here. They feel like guests and they have a guest mentality, but their children don't feel exactly like guests. This is where their children were born and raised. And so their children have almost like, no, they have like an indigenous type understanding as well as an immigrant one, but it's strongly indigenous. So I think it's very critical that we really focus on the youth, the children of immigrants, because the children of immigrants are the link between us and their parents, right? The so-called indigenous Muslims and the immigrant Muslims, that link are the children. They understand they understand certain things about this system because they grew up in it too. So there's certain things they understand by what we say. They'll listen to Brother Muhammad. The children will listen to Brother Muhammad, and they'll understand exactly where Brother Muhammad is coming from, many of them, because they were born and raised here. So I think we need to really focus on the children because the uncles, the aunties, and so on and so forth, they have a guest mentality. So they don't want to rock the boat. So they'll go with whatever narrative that's being given. They will go with that narrative, right? That is sad. CARE would say something like that. Let me give you another example of how it's so important. We mentioned, both me and Brother Muhammad mentioned Dr. Frederick Whitehurst and what Dr. Frederick Whitehurst said about the pressure that was applied on him, right? Now, had we taken the proper position when the first World Trade Center bombing happened, had we taken the proper position on that, then by the time the situation came out with what Dr. Frederick Whitehurst said, it would have confirmed what we were saying. It would have confirmed what we were saying. And so even when Dr. Frederick Whitehurst came out with what he said, our older immigrant brothers, the leadership and the organizations didn't jump on that. They didn't jump on that. And they should have jumped on that like hard. They should have jumped on that. They left it alone. They left it alone. So because of those types of ways of dealing with things, they're thinking that they're actually protecting us, protecting themselves by making statements like that. But it's the exact opposite. They're making us vulnerable to attack by coming from that perspective, right? And so if we just take the perspective that we're supposed to take, we're going to be vindicated. And already we've been vindicated. And so, yes, it's caused a serious problem. But again, many times Allah will allow these things to occur in order to cause a separation, right? There's a certain type of mentality that we have to have as we go into this next century, the so-called next century, their calendar. There's a certain mentality that we have to take. Islam is on the rise. There is an Islamic revival taking place in the world. And I have serious issues with those groups and those teachers and so on and so forth, the sheikh and shuyukh, who don't talk about it. We are in the midst of an Islamic revival. This is why they're doing the things to us that they're doing. We're coming up. So they're trying to use the Al-Qaedas and the ISIS groups as the face of what this Islamic revival, this Islamic resistance represents. And that's a false narrative. It's a false narrative. When you talk, Muslims are struggling for self-determination. Muslims are struggling for self-rule. Muslims are fighting against occupation. That's what Muslims are not planting bombs in Western cities and driving planes into build. That's not the Islamic resistance. That's not the Islamic revival. That's the Islamic revival and the Islamic resistance being hijacked by the West, making people think that this is what it's all about, right? And that's a lie. So when we parrot the same party line of these people who are not righteous and these sources who are not righteous, we become accomplices. And look where it has gotten us now. Look where it has gotten us. Those who try to appease the system, as our brother talked about, look how they're being treated now, right?
Right.
They get thrown in the mix too,
Right.
because and we knew that because we know Uncle Sam. We know the system. They're using you like a tool. Then they're going to get rid of you, put you back in the shed where all tools go. And so this is what we have to really try to deal with. But let me say this real quick too. I've always believed that this whole move to suspend civil liberties because of the Muslim terrorists in the country who are ready to attack, I've always believed that was used only as an excuse to deal with what's happening now.
Mm-hmm.
That was not for Muslims. That was for Americans.
Right.
Because they know that this country is getting ready to go through a period that can make the 60s look like a dress rehearsal, right? As brother was saying, COINTELPRO is now legal now.
Mm-hmm.
COINTELPRO is legal now, right? They don't have to hide now, right? So what's coming in this country, right, is slated to make the 60s look like mere dress rehearsal, because there are major changes coming in this country. And at the core of these changes are going to be black people. And at the core of black people is going to be Islam, right? That's why they said prevent the rise of a Messiah. Right. Malcolm X might have been such a Messiah. Black, male, Muslim. Mm-hmm. It's no coincidence that the voices right now dealing with this issue are black, male, Muslim, right? Because they understand the nature of what they fear the most. So the suspension of civil liberties, the Muslims were used as an excuse. It's actually for what's coming in this country, what's happening. 40-year cycle, 1920s, Garvey, 40 years later, 1960s, right? Starting from 1980, 40-year cycle, 2020s. Why 1980? Because the early 80s was a mini 60s. Mm-hmm. The children of the 60s were in their 20s. I mean, the people who were literally children during the 60s were in their 20s. And they were and they was getting busy. So the early 80s was like a mini 60s. That's why they hit us with crack. Mm-hmm. Start with 1980, 40 years later, that 40-year cycle, the 2020s. And look what 2020 has been about. Right? And so this whole suspension of civil liberties was for Americans to deal with what's getting ready to go down in this country. I want to make that clear, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. That's right. That's facts.
Alhamdulillah. You know something, the observations that both of you have made, and especially what you just ended with Abdel Malik, reminds me of something that Ramsey Clark, former U.S. Attorney General during one of the most tumultuous decades in American history, said some years back. This was back in the mid-90s when we invited him here to address our community, and it was around the time of the case of Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, actually the appeals process of his case when it was ongoing, and Clark was involved. He said in a speech here in the Washington area in Silver Spring, toward the end of a speech he delivered to an audience that was, I would say, 2/3 Muslim, about a third non-Muslim, and there were a number of prominent non-Muslim officials in the audience that came to hear the former U.S. Attorney General speak, who was still a very prominent figure within the human rights community by this time. What he said toward the end of his speech, I'll never forget. And I'll also never forget the reaction that it produced among many of the Muslims that were seated in the audience. He said, America needs Muslims to stand up for Islam.
Mm.
It is the one revolutionary force that truly cares about humanity. This is what he said.
Mm.
And it connects directly to, the observation that you just made about, how Islam, the Islamic revival that's taking place, and the need for this revival, just being so very important. And it's something that, subhanAllah, we as Muslims, we have got to recognize, what it is we have. But with that said, we are in the final minutes of this this program that has just gone on. It has gone by much too quickly, and I want to open the floor for both of you to make some closing observations. Whatever you feel needs to be said, you want to conclude this discussion with on this topic of remembering September 11th before and after. Well, since we began with Amir Abdul Malik Ali, we'll begin these closing remarks with you, Brother Muhammad Bashir.
Alhamdulillah, thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you, Imam, for participating. I always love your insights. I'm always empowered by your thoughts and by your words. I always try to make sure people know when you're on so that they can get the benefits. So I don't feel like I'm the only one out there yelling at yelling fire when my hands are burning. Let me say this briefly. I really am. I see 9/11 every day. I'm telling you a fact. 9/11 is with me every day. The World Trade Center first trial is with me every day. It was what took away my idealism. You come out of law school, you think, I'm going to change the world, I'm going to be in a fight, I'm going to put the good fight. And then you begin to see what are considered to be Al-Qaeda training camps. And you realize I saw the movie that was in. And they're pawning it off as if it's actual training video. And you hear people like Whitehurst who shake on the witness stand. And you try to get to talk to Imad Salem, and you realize that the government is keeping them away from the trial. You all of a sudden my idealism is gone, but my Islam is still there. And so it tells me I have to be the change that I say that I want in the system. If I believe that I'm going to be in America and I want to see America succeed because my children and maybe my grandchildren may grow up here, I have to do what's necessary to put this message out of truth, no matter who it's for or who it's against, an Islamic tenet in the hearts and the minds of people. And so therefore I have to say it, then I have to stand for it. And then when I see it, I have to try to change it every kind of way I can when the lies come up.
Allahu Akbar.
When someone says that there's a war on terror, and the war on terror takes its position in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Iran and in Somalia and in Sudan, and there are no Sudanese or Somalis or Iraqis allegedly on these planes. Then I have to say, I got to speak out against that. I got to say, folks, look and see what's really going on. Take a look. When someone says, we're going to declare a war on this or a war on that, and they use the same strategy, the same Gulf of Tonkin, the same incubator, the same strategy of Libya, Obama. Come on. Hey, brother. Oh, we got to rescue these people because they're going to massacre. Then I say, you got to look closely. You got to look closely. You got to look at Yemen because it's connected. Isn't it intriguing that the revolution in Iran is intimately connected to the oil pipeline they're trying to build in Yemen, and the minute they get connected to it, the Saudis attack Yemen. What next? I mean, now the Saudis are, I mean, the Saudis are the good guys and the Iranis are the bad guys. They're the so-called terrorists. These code words are what have been used with savages, Indians, right? Ignorant for blacks. What do they call us in Birth of a Nation, 1915? We go back so far with this strategy that if we sat down with every community and talked to them of just about the history without even getting into the Islam, we would be able to communicate the entire history of America just through the black experience. But then Allah blessed us to have the Islam.
That's right.
So not only do we have the history, we have what Moses had when he went back to Pharaoh. I was born and raised in your house. When Allah calls on him and he says, Musa, I want you to go back. He says, I know what he could do, Allah. Can you show me what you could do? He's telling me, I know the heart of this Pharaoh. I know the heart of this culture. And this is what we've been trying to tell the immigrant community and the American community. We know your heart, but we also know the solution to how it is that you cure your heart.
That's right.
With that, if we are able to do that, 9/11 becomes the kind of situation to where truth is clear and falsehood must vanish.
Yes, that's right.
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Abdel Malik, go ahead.
I want to just appreciate my brother's remarks. As brothers like that keep us strong, and I want to say Jazakallah khair for that. In every one of these countries, in our countries, there's an Islamic revival, an Islamic movement. And the way it usually goes is Islamic revival, Islamic movement, Islamic revolution, Islamic government. So far, there's only one country that has gone through all four, Iran. But in all other countries, there's Islamic revivals and Islamic movements. So the goal of these leaders in those countries is make sure that those Islamic movements do not graduate to Islamic revolutions. Because once they graduate there, then the fourth is inevitable, Islamic government. There's an ayat in Quran where Allah talks about those who will spend all types of wealth to divert people away from Allah's path, but they will be frustrated as a result because it won't work. How many billions and billions of dollars have been used since 9/11 to divert people away from Islam? And still we are growing. A priest a couple of months ago in the Vatican said in 10 years, the number one religion in Europe will be Islam. What? 19 years after 9/11? And Islam is ready to take over Europe? The most common name in England, the most common name in Norway is Muhammad. This is 19 years after 9/11 because Allah is in charge and there's nothing they can do when Allah does a thing. There's nothing they can do to stop it. So all of the money, all of the wealth, all of the armaments that they've used to divert people away has not changed and altered Allah's plan one iota. Islam is still on the rise, and it's on the rise more than ever. I'll end with this. The example that we use. If you take a ball and drop a ball, it comes up but so high. If you take that same ball and slam it to the ground, it comes up higher and faster. You leave Islam alone, it's coming up. But you try to slam it to the ground, it's coming up higher and faster. And that's what we're seeing today. Jazakallah khair.
Alhamdulillah. On that note, my brothers and guests, we've been monitoring this program. I want to say that I am very happy that we were able to substitute. Actually, this was not the original plan to have this program. We were initially planning to have a all sisters roundtable, political roundtable, to follow the all brothers roundtable that we had done. And unfortunately, as we were getting closer and closer to the day for this broadcast to take place, we were still having trouble, challenges, confirming the sisters that we had targeted for invitations, and we were just having difficulty. So we decided, kind of in the 11th hour, to go with this conversation instead. And alhamdulillah, I'm glad that we did. Allah's the best of planners. because this is a conversation that needed to be had. I want to thank both of my brothers, especially for accepting the invitation in the 11th hour. Amir Abdul Malik Ali and brother Muhammad Bashir, Esquire, for joining me in this very important conversation 2 days after the 19th observance, 19th anniversary of this dark observance. Let me say in conclusion that the point that was made by both brothers, with a special emphasis by Amir Abdul Malik Ali, concerning this unique position that Muslims are in because of this revival, this unmistakable revival that is taking place here in America and around the world. You know, we as Muslims, we need to really be conscious of the challenge and the opportunity that Allah Ta'ala has placed upon our shoulders. This is a tremendous opportunity for us to exemplify the power and the beauty of Islam, you know, just by having the courage and the intestinal fortitude to stand as the Muslims that we're supposed to be. This coronavirus pandemic, the Black Lives Matter related uprisings, this tumultuous election season that we're in, you know, all of this represents a shaking of our society. It's going through a tremendous shaking, a shock. And the thing that is needed more than anything else is faith. It is faith. And this is something that we are supposed to represent. Faith. Faith in the Almighty. No calamity occurs except by the permission of Allah. Faith in the Almighty and what the Almighty has given us. So we want to remind ourselves of this, that we are in a very unique place, Muslims here in America and around the world, you know, to be the good neighbor that our non-Muslim brethren so desperately need by exemplifying this one-of-a-kind world-class deen called Islam. On 10/10/20, less than a month from now, 10/10/20, October 10th, 2020, there's going to be a very important anniversary celebration of the Coalition for Civil Freedoms, also known as the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. This organization that was founded by our brother, Dr. Sami Al-Arian, when he was still a political prisoner, still in lockdown. You know, Malcolm said, you know, a prison is a place where a man can go if he needs to do some thinking. Well, Dr. Sami Al-Arian, being the Muslim that he is, he did a lot of very deep exploratory thinking and analysis. And he came up with an idea for a coalition organization that would work to help support the better of the two Americas on the civil liberties front, on the freedom and justice for all front. This organization that we are proud to be one of the co-founders of, we are one of the, you know, alhamdulillah, one of the brothers that Dr. Sami Al-Arian came to and shared this idea with, and we immediately signed on. It will be celebrating this coalition 10 years. And brothers and sisters, this organization is like no other organization in the country. It's a coalition organization of different organizations, some very good spirited people, Muslims and non-Muslims, who have been working to give support to Muslim political prisoners and their families, and to engage in the kind of work that needs to be done in order for us to help reform this nation of ours. There's no other organization in America that has done more for Muslim political prisoners and their families. And so I wanted to close this uh, uh, presentation, today's program, on this note of reminding us all of what's coming down the pike on October 10th, this celebration, this opportunity to show your love and support and appreciation for this organization that has been on the front line for Muslim political prisoners and their families, when the vast majority of other organizations out here in the public square, Muslim and non-Muslim, have not. The vast majority have not. And it's really been a shame on the Muslim organizations. So this will be an opportunity for us to show our love and to show our support. With that said, I want to thank you for joining us for this special broadcast. I want to thank our brother engineer Sadiq in South Africa for the work that he did today around the program, and also for everyone else that has been part of the process of helping to promote the programs, the designers of the banners, the promotional banners that go out. You know, we thank you. We thank you for what you're doing. And again, we thank our brothers and sisters, both Muslim and non-Muslim, our brothers and sisters of good hearts and minds who want peace through justice in America and around the world. We want to thank you for tuning in, and we pray to Allah Ta'ala that you have found this hour spent with us to be well worth your time. With that said, we close as we normally do with a Quranic dua. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa amalu salihati. Wa tawasaw bil haqq. Wa tawasaw bis sabr. By the token of time through the ages, verily humanity is in loss, except those who believe and do good, and exhort one another to truth, and exhort one another to patiently persevere. Peace be unto you. Assalamu alaikum.